right, welcome back to another lesson on the law. Today's lesson is titled Natural Order, and we are moving on to the fifth commandment, which is the first that pertained to social order, you could say, or societal order and structure. Where you could say the first four were in relation to God and how he wants to be worshipped uniquely. That is, the first ones, like last week we discussed the Sabbath day and that, God wants a special day in his name and that we rest and that we go to church, those things. And also, like idolatry, don't make images, whether physical or kind of paintings or whatnot, to kind of avoid those things. Don't, correlate pagan worship in. And so, just like I said, the first four were relating to God, and the rest of the commandments are relating to how we treat people and others. And this one is kind of, I guess you could say, the connecting two, and really is focused on structure and order within society. And that's why I kind of named it Natural Order. Now, here's the list of the 10 commandments again. Honor thy father and thy mother is the fifth one, as many of us probably do know very well. And now this law seems simple enough, but I think there's a lot more to this law than simply obedience, but natural structures, I'm saying. Now, although we will, of course, discuss discipline and obedience heavily, but there is more, I believe. But of course, we got to look at the verse. So let's look at Exodus 20, verse 12. Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long upon the land which the Lord your God is giving you. Now, the instruction here is paying respect to the one who raises. For if it says you will live a long life if you do. Now, I was kind of pondering, why is that the case? It says if you obey, if you honor, you will live a long life. And I kind of was thinking, well, it's obvious that your parents have lived a lot longer than you have, or the child, unless on very rare occasions, if you were adopted and somehow they're older, or I don't know what other reasons really there could be, but the parent person would be older than the child. And so with that comes wisdom by age, and just with time that they've lived, and they've, made mistakes themselves. And so they want to obviously be teaching rules or setting up, things for their children so that they don't make the same mistakes as they have in their lives. And so that's kind of what I was gathering from that you live a long life, well, because your parents have already lived a certain length of time, and so they'll be, giving their wisdom and passing it on to you, the child. Now, obviously, I was thinking too, is like, this is why every parent focuses on different things, because they've experienced different things in their lives and they've made different mistakes. And so maybe one parent will really focus on being strict on one thing over another. And as like I was thinking, society now is kind of, you could say that a lot of parents are now dealing with the concept of, well, how much time should their children spend on technology, as computers or cell phones? Should they even have a cell phone? At what age do they have a cell phone? And so parents are always you could say evolving over what society is also dealing with. But I think also that comes and goes with whatever society is doing. Now, if the child is not taught obedience and respect, then often the child will get into crime, or I would say other delusions. And if you really look at criminality, I guess you could say, a lot of times people will go and look at the home life of a criminal, and what they find is often they're missing one of their parents, specifically generally the father. I think the last 19 mass shooters did not have a father figure in the home. And so a lot of people, want to blame one thing or another, but it seems to be the case that having a lack of a father figure in the home is a lot more damaging than many other things in the home. So that's why God is really focusing on this first. It's like, hey, let's work on the family unit, and we'll be able to fix a lot of other things. And that's why it dawned on me. It's amazing, when I'm preparing these lessons, God just, speaks to your heart, and it hits you, And it was, why did this law come before the other four, or the next four, or five, actually, can't count. But It's because God said, okay, if you get this in order, if you get this commandment just perfect, then you won't even have to deal with the next ones like murder and adultery and stealing and lying, because those should be taught in the home. Now, if you don't obey this, and if you don't, if you're not a parent to your children, then obviously they're going to have problems with it. But it never dawned on me that was, there's reason, but even within order and why God focuses or put things in a certain way. It's just amazing how he does things like that. Now, again, I'm saying that this is really just focusing on order and structure in society, because really you can't have a society built on rebellion and anarchy. A lot of times they joke about anarchy only lasts a day because eventually people will start forming groups and says, well, let's make you a leader, or let's work together on this situation or that situation, and inevitably you have a new society with rules and regulations just like there was before. But it obviously takes time to become big enough to become another government or whatnot. But yeah, so you can't have anarchy or rebellion as your core of society. It must be structure, and that's what God is setting up here. So looking at another verse, though, in Deuteronomy 21:18-21, if a man has a stubborn and rebellious son who will not obey the voice of his father or the voice of his mother, and who, when they have chastened him, will not heed them, then his father and his mother shall take hold of him and bring him out to the elders of the city, to the gate of the city, and they shall say to the elders of the city, this son of ours is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey our voice. He is a glutton and a drunkard. Then all the men of his city shall stone him to death with stones. So you shall put away the evil from among you, and all Israel shall hear and fear. So, as you can see, with a lot of the other commandments, the death penalty was prescribed. Now, I would say on extreme cases, as you can see within the text, the parents did first chasten him, which means, disciplining, instruction. And after if the child still disobeys, then the stoning would follow suit. Now, I was also, paying attention to other things, that it seems that it went along with other sins, such as being a glutton or a drunkard. And so you could actually kind of make the case that being an alcoholic or a glutton almost also deserved the death penalty. And I know I've had discussions with people saying that, well, God sets up certain laws that have no actual punishment except physical ones, and they always reference these two, gluttony and drunkard, and they say, well, see, if you sin the sin of gluttony, well, God set it up that your body would get, type 2 diabetes, or, you'll have other side effects from gluttony or drunkardness, that, you live a shortened life. You'll have, your kidney failure or other situations like that. Your body will just decay quicker. And so a lot of times they'll point to that and say, oh, see, God set it up this, and that's how our society should also set up certain things that there aren't actual laws against, and just say, well, if that's your choice to be stupid, then, you have natural consequences. And yes, I think God obviously set up natural consequences to make it impossible to get away from your sin in one regard. But it is interesting that it is pointed out here as an example of rebellion and disobedience as the reason behind the actual stoning process of someone. So I think there's something interesting there. And there was also something I was kind of thinking, because this is referring to a child. How is drunkardness correlated to children? So that brings up a question of alcohol, and I don't really have an answer, but I was just thinking about that. It was a really interesting thing. Is the child, how old is this child? Could maybe the child actually be a lot older? Or is alcohol, was there really any age limit like we do in our society today? There's just certain things I don't really know, but I found a very interesting thing to ponder. Maybe, you'll figure out certain answers on that. But this is, as I've read too, a very rare case for the actual death penalty being prescribed to children within the Bible. So, but it was prescribed. It does seem, though, for the most rebellious of children. So that does bring up, statement of that's how serious God took it. You don't want a society built on rebellion and dissidence. Now, what is the biblical view on discipline? Well, we already saw that the death penalty was an option. Those who have heard spanking is not biblical or unhealthy, well, I think the Bible might not be in disagreement. We'll have to look at some verses, but if the Bible prescribed the death penalty, what is spanking or other punishments that people would call corporate punishment, harsh, scar the children for life? I just don't see it though. But let's move on. Let's look at some verses. So Proverbs 23, it says, "Withhold not discipline from the child, for if you strike and punish him with the rod, he will not die. You shall whip him with the rod and deliver his life from Sheol." Now, Sheol, translates literally to the pit, or the grave, and also in other translations do just or translate it to hell. And so it's saying discipline will deliver you from hell or death. And so this verse is really telling parents to not neglect to discipline your children. Don't be swept up thinking the child will be scarred for life. I like how it says that he will not die, as if a lot of children will say, "Oh, my life's over. You can't. I'm gonna die." Very dramatic, but the verse is pointing that out. It's like, you'll be fine. And so really, those who say spanking is wrong, well, the Bible readily instructs parents to whip their children. That's even I would say a step above spanking, at least in our view. Now, I would like to make a point about discipline and why it seems there is physical means prescribed. Well, I think that's all because the mindset of a child. A child is very dumb, you could say. They're just not that smart. Now, obviously, that comes with time. You have to teach them. But the thing is, they are very short-sighted and think about pain in the now and want it to stop as immediately as possible. And so they learn obedience and respect from it very quickly. Now, the thing is, when they realize the pain is only temporary and toughen up over time, then that they start to, physical means don't really have an effect as much, and so you have to move on to different types of discipline. And so I feel as parents, you have to kind of maybe structure discipline differently between the different ages. Now, obviously, that's the case as many people do, move on to other psychological or other disciplinary actions, but you have to, meet punishment that correlates to the crime and one that actually is effective. But moving on to another verse in Proverbs, it says, "Blows that wound cleanse away evil, and strokes of correction reach to the innermost parts." And so there's really not much to say except that discipline kind of rids the child of evil. It says the innermost parts, it cleanse away evil. So I just found that verse very interesting, and also the physicality of it, saying blows, that's a physical hit verbiage. You could say it's bringing that to mind, a hit. So very physical in manner. Another verse brings up in Proverbs 19:18, it says, "Discipline your son, for there is hope. Do not set your heart on putting him to death." So here's one saying that don't jump to the death penalty. In a sense, you could say, parents, you must go through due process. You can't just be like, well, I made poor decisions in my life and I kind of not happy with this and I'm just going to end it all. Don't do that. You got to be a parent first. It's saying you have responsibilities. You must first, discipline and instruct and make, every attempt not to before actually going the actual final punishment, you could say. Don't be, I would say this verse is saying, don't be cruel and just jump to the worst. You won't, give someone a death penalty unless they truly deserved it, the case. And so kind of with those three verses that are from Proverbs is, discipline does the soul good in one regard, and one should be learning obedience and respect, and that our actions do have consequences from these verses. And so now that kind of brings in the question, well, is there things parents shouldn't do, in correlation to, discipline or just kind of more lifestyles within the home? There are only a few passages that do talk about this subject. One most notably known is in Ephesians 6:4. "Fathers, do not irritate and provoke your children to anger. Do not exasperate them to resentment, but rear them tenderly in the training and discipline and the counsel and admonition of the Lord." And so it's really, stressing the tenderly, aspect. You don't want to just take a very negative tone, angry all the time. They will pick up on that, and I don't think that fosters up a good spirit within the house. And you're really not trying to just irritate, provoke them intentionally, and just trying to make them angry. You're not trying to just your purpose of being a parent is not just to annoy your children. You're obviously trying to instruct them the way of life, and the ways of God, and for the benefit of them long term. And so you kind of have to consider those to be how you raise your children. Now there's another one that's pretty much the same. In Colossians 3:21, it says, "Fathers, do not provoke or irritate or fret your children. Do not be hard on them or harass them, lest they become discouraged and sullen and morose and feel inferior and frustrated. Do not break their spirits." Now, if you haven't couldn't tell already, I did take from the Amplified version of the Bible, because I really liked how that kind of brought out the meaning, I would say, from the verses. And I really like how that last passage, or last sentence put it, is "do not break their spirits." And so I really think from those two verses, you can really gather that the main concept of do not intentionally break their spirit. As parents, you don't want to just try to mess with them and just destroy their, mental state, you could say. And I would say that children should trust their parents, and even in discipline, understand why they are being disciplined. And that's where, when I was younger, my parents always, or pretty much normally always, asked if I understood why I was being disciplined before proceeding, so that you understand why you're being disciplined. And I was thinking also there was a situation in one of the old TV shows, what was it? Little House on the Prairie. And I can't remember I think his name was Alfred, something with that, I forgot. But the child did something wrong, and eventually, he came to and said, yeah, I did something wrong and I deserve punishment. And he went to his dad and, said, I deserve punishment. And the episode ended on, he said, "Yeah, you're right, son." And he took him out back and whipped him, and you could just hear him being whipped. And that was just a very amazing scene to see, that just, what type of maturity the child had in that situation to actually request the punishment. Because just because one is sorry or apologetic, that doesn't really necessarily negate the crime that one's done or the punishment that follows, in a sense. If you break something, you being sorry about it doesn't change the actual fact of it being broken, something like that. And so kind of other things that I don't think really parents should really participate is in participating in practical jokes, just intentional prodding of the child, and I think that really fosters a spirit of distrust of their parents, and you really don't want to do that. The child should normally trust the parent in all situations, and I don't think that's helpful. And that's why you wouldn't ever lie to your children. You want to be as truthful as possible to your children. And, I know there's certain situations you don't want to say something, and that's normally the best way to do it. Just don't say it. Don't answer certain questions or whatnot. Avoid it. To avoid lying, that's the most important thing. You don't want to be sinning by lying, and you don't want to cause them to not trust you. And so the last thing I was thinking is just resentment. Anything that causes resentment, really, I think just that's going a bit too far. Now, I would like to preface this all by, there's a fine line, of course. Since children obviously can be very dramatic, and they think the world is over at a drop of a hat. So you have to, figure out if your child is just, "Oh, the world's over, woe is me," or, "Okay, this person's actually going to jump off a cliff. Maybe something needs to be done." So you kind of have to, distinguish between the two, and kind of proceed from there. Now, moving on to another verse, kind of in this line of what not to do. Well, in 1 Samuel 3, "In that day I will perform against Eli all that I have spoken concerning his house from beginning to end, for I have told him that I will judge his house forever for the iniquity which he knows, because his sons made themselves vile, and he did not restrain them." Now, this is kind of the verse in the middle of the story. I didn't really want to give all the verses correlating to, because I think this is a very well-known story amongst Christians, and if you don't know it, you probably should already be knowing this. But it's, Samuel is the adopted son, you could say, of Eli, and he was being woken up in the middle of the night, and Eli said, "Okay." On a few occasions later, says, "Oh, here here I am, your servant. And at that time, God prophesied judgment to come of Eli's actual sons. And that's where you see that, highlighted red, because Eli knew that his real sons were becoming vile, being undisciplined, you could say. And he did nothing. He took a passive parenting role and just let them be. Boys will be boys, right? That's kind of what he did. But, you shouldn't do that. You should discipline and restrain. So there's just this aspect that judgment would come. And so with kind of that verse and that concept, God judged those who are undisciplined. If the parent does not take the active role in parenting, God will take it upon himself to discipline them. And that's where in Eli's situation, his sons did actually die in battle later as judgment. That's what God chose for the judgment. And it's judgment on the children, but also on the parent, because the parent does not want to see their children die, especially, before them. It's generally the thought that something that should never happen, the child die before the parent. And so God will do that on many occasions. And then actually, many times also people bring up David as an example of passive parenting, especially with Absalom. And I think that the Eli situation, the story, just kind of summarized the story or that concept of God judging those who are undisciplined very well. Now, I would say this also isn't necessarily just of children. This is just anyone. The parent also is, in one sense, being undisciplined because they should be disciplining. That's part of being disciplined, taking responsibility. Now, today's generation, I would say, become the parents are like, well, let the kids do whatever they want, be what they want, believe what they want, and don't stop them from being, or stopping them from being, I would say, stupid, thinking they aren't, or thinking their genders they are not, or even animals. I knew someone who said that they were a cat, and I'm just like, but you're not, what? And they're like, well, you see, I say meow, and I just feel like a cat. And I'm like, I don't know how to respond to this. Your parents need to tell you that you're living in a fantasy world. You need to stop. This isn't the real world. And it's just like, parents need to do their job and make their kids face reality, in a sense, especially in that. And I would really say that those type of situations that the parents are just saying, yeah, you could be whatever gender you want, be an animal or whatever you want, that is, I would say, parental abuse, especially when you get drugs involved, of saying, oh, you want to be a different gender? Well, let's just start pumping you full of testosterone or estrogen, depending on, what side you want to be. That just is cancerous. Those stuff causes cancer later in life, and actually causes one to be infertile if they really want to be children. Have children later in life. They can't do that anymore. There's a lot of side effects that they don't realize that they're doing, and the parents are supposed to have lived longer, as I said before. And that's kind of one thing I didn't mention, that obviously if you have parents that are bad, then you're gonna probably suffer some other consequences of them allowing you to do stupid things. So even if you obeyed in certain things, then you might still not live a long life, especially in these situations that the parents are actually the ones, I would believe, encouraging their children to be transgender, or all these other things like that I really don't believe the children on their own are seeing this, unless obviously there is a lot of societal pressures going on, and a lot of they hear about this on the news and movies and TV shows nowadays, and so they're like, oh, I want to be cool, and that's really what it is all about, and the parents allow it. So I think there's a lot of give and take there. But kind of moving on, I believe I was looking at the verse, there's a deeper understanding here, and you can kind of look at it, and it says father and mother. It assumes a heterosexual relationship. It didn't say honor your parents, being nebulous, not really specific. It didn't say honor both of your fathers, or your parents who identify as, female and male, and they're actually transgenders. No, it didn't. It's just father and mother. It assumes heterosexuality. Bible, God was setting up the foundation. He says, okay, every household needs to have a father, and it needs to have a mother. If you are lacking, then you're missing. And I've read articles that, from people who have been raised in a homosexual home, They, say they always feel like they're lacking a part of them that their friends, have, and that and depending on the side, if it's, lesbianism or lesbian home, that everything's dramatic, and then if it's like, homosexual, nothing matters. There's definitely there's a reason why God made us, so that we would have, a father and a mother to really balance out the world and upbringing. Is God knows what he was doing, but everyone wants to change. And so that's God is defining here, even within the law, what a family unit is at the core of society. And for us to mess with this is really messing even with the fifth commandment, to just allow marriage to really be anything we want it to be. Now, I would say there is still more than just blood, you could say, within this law too. And you might be like, what do I mean by that? Am I killing someone? Well, no, of course not. The underlying principle below this is honoring those above you who have authority, not just your parents, because there is the situation of adoption, and a lot of people will be like, oh, you're not my real father, so I don't have to listen to me. Well, no, he has the title of parent. He is above you, or in any situation, anyone above you, whether it be work or government, they have the authoritative figure. Therefore, you have the responsibility to obey and honor. And so even God takes on that role as father figure and expects our obedience also. You can kind of see that. That's why I'm saying there's a lot more than just physical, relation to the fifth commandment. And so I was thinking on a couple of verses that kind of correlate with that. Is in Isaiah, kings shall be your foster fathers and their queens your nursing mother. And so this is kind of saying that government can kind of be your parent. And I was thinking like, well, how is that the case? Well, it's because what the goal, or I guess you wouldn't necessarily say goal, what the government does as a society, as for its people, it's similar to your actual parents, just on a larger scale for society. Now, I don't want to push too hard on saying the government is your parent. That can, that can definitely be wrong, especially in the situation of people who treat the parent as, well, I can fall back on and just leech off of via, governmental subsidies and plans that will, just give me free money to buy food and all these other things. No, I don't think the government was ever really meant to be for that, but to, set laws and other things. And so kind of to go more in detail of that, there's the Romans passage that a lot of people know in chapter 13, verses 1 through 4. Let every soul be subject, passage that a lot of people know in chapter 13, verses 1 through 4. Let every soul be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authority resists the ordinance of God, and those who resist will bring judgment on themselves. For the rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil. Do you want to be unafraid of the authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same. For he, referring to the government, is God's minister to you for good. But if you do evil, be afraid, for he does bear the sword in vain, or he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is God's minister, an avenger to execute wrath on him who practices evil. And so I was thinking, this brings up the question, well, what's the definition, you could say, of responsibilities that parents take on and their duties? Well, it's, to set up order in the home. They set up laws, things to do to protect, instruct, and discipline their children. And so just in that like manner, governments do the same thing. They set up laws, they instruct, they discipline those who infringe upon those laws. And it's, the verse here says, are you afraid of the government? Do you not want to go to jail, you could say? Well, simply don't disobey, don't break the laws. It's very simple. And so that's where you can kind of get the understanding that the parents kind of role society or government has, I would say. Now, there's another interesting thing that says here is all governments are set up by God and are meant for judgment and to execute his wrath on those who break the law. And that includes the bad governments that you may not like. And that's where you see how it's appropriately, or not necessarily appropriate, how it's done is God, will maybe use a bad leader to judge society, and then another society or government will come in and judge them, and it kind of goes back and forth. And you see that within the Judges, or the book of Judges, and the Israelites, they went back and forth between good kings and bad kings, and that's God, setting that up for their own disciplinary action for the Israelites. And so God still does that today. Whether you like our current president or not, or previous presidents, they're all set up by God. God is in control of everything. And so you just have to determine, is this a good president, bad president, and what's his purpose in society and God's master plan? And that's kind of the thing. And so kind of with that, you can really just boil down the fifth commandment as respect those in authority. And of course, with respect, our hearts should learn not to be rebellious or disrespectful in that respect. And, obviously this doesn't just have to do with your parents, it could be anyone in authority, your boss at work, government, as I kind of just went over. There are just this general concept of respect and order with the fifth commandment. And Americans, we do not, at least not anymore these days, really abide by this concept of respect and honor. Now, if you go to other countries, maybe like Japan, they are very well practiced in honor and respect, and it's a very different culture. Now, obviously, they have other problems, even though they are very well on respect. But as Americans, we could definitely work on this. Now, there is a video I wanted to play, and I couldn't figure out where exactly to put it, so I was just going to put it at the end. I really liked it. It's a video of the Andy Griffith Show, and a pretty...
Hiya, Taylor. Hi, Arnold. Gosh, you must have been saving up for it since you was a kid. My dad bought it for me. Come on, Taylor. Up on the rack and I'll give you a ride. I can't. I gotta get this garage cleaned up. What happens if you don't? I don't get my quota this week. Kids aren't supposed to work for their allowance. My pa's awful busy. Maybe he hasn't heard this new stuff. Maybe. Okay, I'll ask him. Take it from me. Talking is a waste of time. You have to take action. Kicking a table leg, rolling around on the floor, kicking your feet, pretending you can't stop crying. Gosh, I don't know. Oh, for crying out loud, Taylor. Hey, Arnold. Take it easy, Arnold. I didn't mean to say nothing wrong. Get the idea?
Hey! Stop that bike!
What's the matter?
You're not allowed to ride a bike on the sidewalk.
Oh, watch it.
Doggone it, I warned him, and he deliberately rode on the sidewalk again.
Is that true, son? Did you hear Officer Fife warn you?
Yes, sir?
Young man, I'm gonna have to take this bike and hold it.
You can't take my bike. It's my bike.
Now, you listen here, young fella. When an officer gives you a warning, you're supposed to mind.
Yeah, now get on off of there. Now go on home.
You'll see. I'm gonna tell my dad. Hi, Pa.
Oh, hi, son.
Pa, can I talk to you about something I don't understand?
Sure, come on in.
Oh, that's nice. Very nice.
I just don't understand it, Pa.
What?
None of the other guys work for their allowance. I just don't want to work for my allowance.
No work, no allowance.
That's not fair.
Don't raise your voice to me. Now, you get on out of here. I got things to do. What are you doing?
I was holding my breath.
Good lung exercise. But don't get your clothes all dirty. Sheriff, got Yes, sir. You the boy's father?
That's right, Simon Winkler.
Andy Taylor.
Now then, what's this all about?
249A, section Roman numeral 5.
All right, so he rode his bike on the sidewalk.
Arnold was given warning and continued to ride his bicycle on the sidewalk.
The offense was clearly defined under normal weather conditions.
Everybody's against me.
There, son.
Can't even have a little fun.
Was it such a crime?
Now, if we don't teach children to live in society today, what's going to happen to them when they grow up?
For heaven's sake, Sheriff, the boy's not a criminal.
The minimum punishment for this offense is impounding the bicycle for 1 week.
Well, you can't do it. I demand you return that bike, and now.
Now, you look here. You're that boy's father. You're responsible for his actions. Now, he's too young to be locked up. But if you're not going to take responsibility, maybe I ought to lock you up. You ever think of that?
Go on, put him in jail. He won't care. I don't want to lose my brand new bike. I just got it.
You'd rather I put your father in jail.
I want my bike.
Sheriff, there won't be any need to impound that bike.
How's that? I'm going to sell it.
Sell it. You're going to sell my bike?
That's right, Arnold.
But it's my bike. You can't sell my
Be
bike.
quiet, Arnold.
Mr. Winkler, there's a real nice woodshed out back.
Good old-fashioned woodshed?
Real nice one.
No, I want my bike. I want my bike. I want my bike. Is Ernie going to get spanked, Paul?
Don't you think he deserves it?
I don't want to say. After all, he is one of my own kind. Hi, Paul.
Hi, son.
I was wondering if by any chance you might need a person to clean the garage and do odd jobs around.
There happens to be a recent vacancy in that department.
Oh, boy.
25 cents a week, okay?
Sounds fine to me, Paul.
Good. Oh,
Yeah, Paul?
suppose we make that, 27 cents a week.
That's $1 more a year.
Yeah? What you gonna do with all your money?
Save up for a bell.
A bell?
Uh-huh. Then save up for a bike to put under it.
All right. See, that's the example of good parenting, bad parenting. You know, if you just let your kids do whatever they want, spoil them, they can become pretty nasty. I don't know. There's a lot you could be said about parenting there. Very interesting. But with that, that's the 5th commandment. Hopefully you've learned this and can apply it. And I'll see you guys next week. Thank you for tuning in.